I want to introduce somebody who is no stranger to many of you here. Somebody that has done a tremendous job. I think historians, and particularly local historians, are very important. It gives you really a good sense of place. And I think having an understanding of where you come from really helps people in trying to work out what they want to do. And I think our next speaker, Niall McGinley, has done that on behalf of particularly the community in Donegal. He has done a brilliant piece of work in terms of acknowledging and naming and honouring those who fought, particularly in the First World War. So I'd like to introduce now to you Niall McGinley, who will have a historical look at this Michael Collins. Thank you.
Yes. There were three Michaels, I think, who were outstanding men in recent Irish history. Michael Dwyer of Wicklow, who held against the British for 14 years. Michael Davitt, who gave the farmers of Ireland security in their land. And Michael Collins. Am I not on the microphone? No? Sorry. Do I keep near to it or what? What about that now? Is that any better? Yeah. Not too loud. Well, there's no way to repeat that, I suppose. However, when I was asked about Michael Collins, I went to a man whom I know in Letterkenny, and I said to him, I mentioned that, he says, I am not an admirer of Michael Collins. I don't admire his violence. I said, fair enough, there was plenty of violence in it. So for that reason, I thought I'd give the background of it. If you'll bear with me as briefly as I can. Between 1600 and 1800, let's go back a bit, we suffered, as you well know, under British terrorism. Now, I'm sure David Cameron would have been very indignant of me talking in those terms of it, but it was terrorism and it was sectarian. Under three headings: education, religion and land. Education first. You couldn't be educated unless you became one of the 20% of the people, the Protestants. 80% couldn't be educated, and so whatever education you got, and that's primary education really, had to be done in secret, in a hedge school, barn or something like that. Daniel O'Connell had to be smuggled to France to get education. Number one. Number two, religion. Johnny McCollum, I can tell you about that. The monument up in Sentry Hill, where mass couldn't be said except in some remote area, and a sentry had to be posted to watch out the breezes. Soldiers didn't come. Worse than that, the unbelievable, adding injury to insult, we had to pay tithes to the Protestant religion, the established church, Church of Ireland, what they call it now. And lastly, the land. Landlords were above the law virtually. I'm living on the site of the Derry Bay evictions now, happened in 1861. The poor people paid the rent, walked across the hills in snow to John George Adair's, or to Glenveigh Castle, and paid the rent. no reason why they should be evicted. Yet, 250 or so of them were evicted, thrown out on the road. Children, women. You know the story. So, we suffered. How we survived, I don't know. Lastly, the famine. I'm not going to spend hours talking about the famine. One thing might put it in perspective. In 2003, you probably all saw the famine in Darfur, in Africa, where 100,000 people died of hunger, out of a population of 27 million. In Ireland, it was anything from 1 million to 1.9 million, out of a population of 8 million. That was the last straw, and that was like really what made people form the Irish Republican Brotherhood, or the Fenians. That famine was like a branding iron, put in the fire, red hot, burnt into the hide of a bullock, never to be erased. Michael Davitt was a Fenian. He turned from it after a lot of hardship in prisons in England, and took to what we call, I suppose, democratic action, and spearheaded the Land League. Collins was prominent in the IRB, chairman, I suppose, of it for a long time. My father was a member of the IRB, although he joined it in Oma, but I never heard about them afterwards. I suppose the first fruit of it was the Easter Rising. Collins thought the Easter Rising was a bit of but as a military escapade, he thought it was a farce. It wasn't, well, it didn't make any progress militarily. And there's one thing that that worries me about when the man said to me about violence. There were more civilian deaths in Easter week than there were either soldiers, police, or volunteers. And 3 times as many civilians wounded. So it was indiscriminate, really. Now to local things. In Letterkenny, in September 1917, the volunteers, branch, Company of the Volunteers, was founded in a little hall behind Voodoo. It's called the Sinn Féin Hall. Their aim was to interfere with recruiting for the First World War, which it did. One of their slogans was, join the British Army and see the next world. As you probably heard before. They had no guns, old Italian guns, so the idea was go somewhere where there are guns. They raided Fanet Coast Guard Station, got some guns. In McQuinn, 1920, in May 1920, they raided an RIC barracks and got some guns there. Unfortunately, there was a casualty, a death. But anyway, when my father came back to the town that night, and he was fairly shaken by it all, the county inspector of the RIC, they both, he lived at that time where Mourne Antiques was, and before that, and after his time, Willie Drumgoller, Patsy, lived there. And opposite almost where McMullen's solicitors is, that's where the county inspector and the district inspector. The county inspector came into the district inspector and says, that was McGinley and his gang. And the district inspector said, I saw him in Castlegate. Oh, well, he says, mustn't have been him. But the district inspector was Patrick Walsh from Castleblaney. And then more to say about him. One day Sergeant Grattan, some of you may know Sergeant Grattan, he lived in the High Road. The house was gone now, and his daughter May Grattan and Henry Grattan. Sergeant Grattan called across to my father, the house I told you about, and said, District Inspector Patrick Walsh wants to speak to you. I says, okay. And over he came. And they said, I'm the new DI, you can trust me. So my father replied, I'm not in the habit of trusting DIs. However, he was a bit taken aback because Willie Holmes of Dromall had left in some bullets and they were sitting there in a tin box. And there was Sinn Féin literature. British officer then came to the door and watched me, called him, he says, round the house, he says, don't let anyone in. And Walsh went into the room and put the bullets in his pocket and the Sinn Féin literature in another pocket. And that was that. After the truce, Walsh came back to my father and says, give him back the bullets and the literature. And he said to him, I hope it's all over now. And they shook hands. Now, the question is, had Collins made contact with Patrick Walsh or not? And now I come to the man who spoke to me about violence first, Hugh Duffy of College Road, whom you may know, retired teacher. His uncle, John Duffy of Athenry, was in the RIC. I think he was in Athlone. And he got a message from Michael Collins to meet him in a hotel in Dublin. Some of the local volunteers must have told him he was sympathetic. So John Duffy went up to him and met him and talked to him, and obviously must have agreed to pass on information. And that was the key to Collins' success. All down history, the spy system of the English defeated us. Owen O'Neill in 1640s was followed by spies all around Brussels. It is thought that Reg O'Donnell was poisoned in St. Andrews, and there's no end to it. But that's where Collins, he got under the skin. Imagine knowing about John Duffy and having contact with him. And John Duffy saved countless lives. And Hugh told me, he says, what's amazing is how he got away with it in his own station or barracks. So it's likely, but I have no proof of it, that Patrick Walsh was in cahoots with Collins. Quickly to finish off, Collins floated a loan for the first dial, to keep it in finance naturally. And my father was down in Rossnakill, and he thought a harmless enough thing. He was advocating the dial loan, looking for money for it, and he was arrested. On the 12th of December 1919, spent 6 months in Derry jail and Mountjoy. I'm not going to talk about Civil War or anything like that. I've written about it. And people can. Next thing I wanted after the Civil War. No. My father, I suppose he must have met him obviously, Michael Collins' second dial. He certainly had a terrific admiration for him, and of course he held that nothing would have been accomplished without his work. So I'd like to read remember Michael Collins was the son of a small farmer living in the town of Woodfield outside Clonakilty. And this was the man who took over from England after 700 years. And read what happened in Dublin Castle at that time. Dublin Castle was built in the 1222, 700 years later, yeah, by order of King John. On January the 16th, 1922, the Provisional Government Chairman Michael Collins took over the administrative machinery of Ireland in Dublin Castle. The King's Deputy, Lord Fissallen, handed over authority in a quiet ceremony described by one of the departing officials thus. A few minutes later, the Lord Lieutenant appeared, and the ministers, some of whom 6 months before had a price on their heads, were introduced to His Excellency. And then he said, was it drama? The drama of 700 years, or was it drama, comedy, farce, or tragedy? Was about to be played out. The curtain was about to fall on the last act and the last scene. So simple, it's amazing. Well, I'll come to this later. On January the 31st, the 1st Regiment of the Irish Army, the Dublin Guards, marched past City Hall, down Dame Street to take over Beggar's Bush Barracks from the British Army. As City Hall was where the government operated from, administered from, at Upper Dame Street. And after the march passed, Collins was taking it, of course, in the form of a platform or something. Collins was heard to say, a rashing upper. He knew that it was work, an enormous task, but he had the energy for it. Now, on the 9th of February, the 7th of February, a letter arrived on Patrick Walsh's desk in Letterkenny saying that his name had been recommended for a committee which was going to establish the Garda Síochána. And he was recommended by Dr. McGinley, and the letter is, I think, a copy of it in the Garda station up there. But that meeting was held, and again, my father was on the committee. He was a TD at the time, he was on the committee, in the Gresham Hotel on the 9th of February. Now, the rest I have in the note here, but I remember as well. The next is an incident I'd like to see commemorated in Letterkenny. On the 28th of March, Tuesday 28th of March, the RIC gathered their ammunition, well, fortunately plenty of rifles, putting it into armoured cars. Up in McCool's pub on the Market Square, the volunteers in their caps and ordinary coats was gathering up rifles. They marched down up the street to where McMullen's solicitors are and took over from this well-paid, well-clad, well-armed police force. And James McMonigal was there at the time, and he said to me, before he died, I looked down the Port Road, a dismal, dreary day like today. 700 years of English rule. Who gives a damn? And the armoured car moved off to Derry. The last incident now I want to mention, I hope I haven't spoken for on, was sometime in September, I don't know the date exactly, when the first batch of guards arrived by CDR train in Letterkenny, unarmed, and they had to take a very circuitous route to get here because they would have been shot by the anti-treaty forces. And my father and Dr. Moore from St. Connell's met them at the station and marched up the Port Road. Eventually they took, they were sent to various stations, unarmed guards. Stability was now here, and a new Ireland and an independent democratic Ireland was established. And, well, there was one person to thank for it, according to my father. The king found Michael Collins. That's it.
Places that you can relate to, and it's just great when people have the gift and the knowledge and the talent to be able to make history come alive for us. And I think it's a tribute to you, Niall, for what you've done. And undoubtedly, it's very important that that sort of history is acknowledged and should be commemorated in some way. So I'd like to thank you very much, Niall, for what you've done for us today. And I know for the Collins Committee, they in planning it here weren't aware of any connection, but they knew there had to be one, but they weren't aware of any connection. And they found all sorts of connections already. And isn't it about discovering our history, regardless of what way it is? And we've been very good at that lately in terms of acknowledging all sorts of things in our past and coming to terms with them, both historical and otherwise.